There is no I in the team. That's what we've been hearing for quite some time now. I wonder if there is space for strong individuals in the team. My name is Mike.
And it's Yuen.
Welcome to the Imperfect Clinician.
Why are we talking about this today?
In life, we tend to display more individualistic qualities, or sometimes we tend to be more like team players. But in between all this attitude to how we approach our tasks, life, work, or our nature in general, in the middle of it, there is a workplace. And the mixture of talent is supposed to work out both for the individuals and the team, and between the team, all the dependencies and influences. So you would consider as a leader that both of those values, teamwork and being individualistic, both antonyms, are quite desired, because you want to have strong individuals, but on the other hand, you want to have a strong team that collaborates between each other. And how do we make this happen? Because those two ideas seem to exclude each other. I think that the proportion of those qualities in the workplace determine the team culture, and further on affects the health in a team.
So let's start with what is individualism?
I would like to describe it with certain characteristics or certain qualities that are commonly associated with individualism. So I made a little list, and I think that that covers quite a wide spectrum of the ideas, and just bouncing, certain attributes that you would normally describe people who display more individualistic traits. So independence is one of the top ones for me. So you want to see people who are independent, people who value high personal performance. Usually it's underlined by creativity, also with diversity, because people who are individuals displaying individualistic traits are quite diverse. They all seem to be quite unique and different. Personal accountability, those people usually are quite dependent in that respect. They usually have their own initiative. They tend to be innovative, autonomous as well. They often display individual identity. One of the characteristics that describes them would be self-reliance, but also self-interest that motivates and provides them with a job satisfaction. Those people in a team prefer individual rewards, individual recognition, and even accolades. They can cause friction. That's one of the downsides of them, because in most cases they seem to know better. They also tend to be quite competitive, and they get quickly demotivated if there is lack of praise, if there is a lack of results, and if there is insufficient appreciation, and that can potentially reduce their self-value. In the long run, individualistic people tend to have probably more stress and are more prone to exhaustion, because they seem to carry the whole burden of the project, of the ideas, on the shoulders. And they also are quite judgmental, but they also feel judged most of the time by others. That's why they want to perform to the best ability. So, yeah, that's what I would consider quite a wide spectrum of qualities of individualistic people.
So it sounded to me there is some overlapping with people who show individualism with people who struggle with perfectionism, because they are high achievers or want to be, because they are afraid of being judged.
I'm pretty sure that if you start, disassembling or individually looking into people who are from more collective and more individual sort of side of the spectrum, you're going to see some traits of perfectionist in people who are working more as individuals. I think that's maybe not comes hand in hand, because I'm pretty sure that those people also could have brilliant like organizational skills and it can make it into success. But I think that this veers onto the idea of being more perfectionist.
Yeah, and it feels like it's more fear driven, like you've mentioned about reduced self values, needing praise, might take on too much of the things themselves, leading to stress and exhaustion. Another thing I think it's quite important to understand this concept, it's because it's good as a leader and as someone who works in a team, which all of us would do, is to be aware that people like this do exist and the type of support that they need would be different. So it's a bit like when you are a teacher, the students that you speak to, they have different learning styles and learning abilities, and you try to cater or adapt to them as much as possible so everyone has good progression based on their own learning needs and you're able to support them with that. And I think when you're a team leader or a team member, having sight of this is important for you to manage team health. So, what's the opposite then of individualism? Is it teamwork?
Yeah, teamwork, and the people who are more comfortable in a team display more collectivism sort of traits that define them in a way, or define the nature as such. So collectivist approach focuses on mainly on group benefit, and the team needs are more important over any particular member of the team, over the individual. They tend to create group identity, and that matters more than individual people involved in the project. They tend to be more interdependent, and through that, it encourages collaboration. Those people are also quite loyal to the team and to the organizations, and they have usually strong dedication to the project because they feel a bit more comfortable around others. That being said, others may feel like they're sort of a part of like a group motivation scheme where people feel obliged to contribute because they're being well audited by others, by the lack of better description. Because people who work in a collective situations, in teams, always are going to contribute at a different level. There are people who contribute more or less within certain project on certain day, on a certain agenda, for example. That can potentially lead to the motivation of others and people who are being carried by the more contributing ones. And that might be displayed by, putting less effort than others. That can also generate issues if values of the team are different from values of individual team members. That can then create problems with, well, basically not put enough effort into supporting things that are not in line with your own personal beliefs or your own personal purpose. Potentially, that can lead to anxiety and feeling of being judged. And that can also be a result of, in the longer run, probably of losing identity. The difference between those two groups are that people who display more individualistic traits, they are much less likely to ask for help and they need a different support comparing to people who work in a collective. Usually people in a collective, all the groups vary and people are different, but as a rule of thumb, shall we say, people in collective may need some more social support, meaning improvement of communication between the team members, moral support,
More
or
community
more
effort.
community effort.
Yeah.
Whereas the support for individualistic people, you would probably focus more on helping one-to-one, but one-to-one in terms of helping with the project itself, rather than the social aspect of it. Because they might stumble on a certain project that they took on, and they might struggle to ask for help. So there's a bigger role of trying to identify those sticky points so that you use the full potential and you don't create the barriers in progressing of the project in general.
So then how do you go about it when you have an imbalance in the group where some thrives in creativity and individualism, whereas some don't?
Imbalance is the nature of life, and it is very hard to have a perfect balance all the time. There will be situations where balance is better than at other points. And I think let's go back to a little bit of a disclaimer. It's very hard to find people who are only working or displaying individualistic traits. And it's very hard also to find people who only work in a team. Especially in our field, we come across people who are, well educated, often experienced, and they have got some sort of background. And to some extent, they can display probably both characteristics. There are some probably professional. I don't quite know that much about people who work completely as individualistic. Probably you would look at some artists, probably you would look at freelancers, probably you can look at, I don't know, architects who work only by themselves on their own projects. But then again, if you want to work on a slightly bigger, more complex situations, you would need to collaborate a little bit more. So I think that the main idea that surrounds people within a team, whether they display individual or team characteristics, is the purpose. And gathering around the purpose of the team or of the project can probably give us the best chance of trying to get people to work on the same page, to the same great ability to fulfill the purpose.
So to break it into example, I will list examples in my head and you can tell me whether I'm in the right direction of what you're talking about.
Okay.
So let's say the group project is helping to deal with population health. And when you assess the group, you can see individualistic characters where, let's say, somebody is more data driven, somebody is better at thinking ideas in the head, somebody else is good at collaborating with external parties. There is another person who is good at galvanizing all of these different ideas and make it all into one. And that person might be a more teamwork person or collectivism, like you said. And so, how to utilize each trait or talent of different people in the team to make the project a success. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does, because people have got different, abilities and strengths. Absolutely.
So, am I thinking in the right format based on what you've discussed so far?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, most of the people that you mentioned would probably skew towards the individualistic traits rather than a team as such. But then gathering people around the same purpose shouldn't stop us from playing to individual strengths. So it's the role of the leader to make sure that we understand people and that communication, open channel of communication. I think it's worth also noting that people who are more individualistic, they prefer slightly flatter structure of the organization, where people tend to be more equal and those leaders are not as clearly defined, not as bureaucratic, and it tends to be slightly more the country of equals, yeah, in that respect. Whereas with the team, usually that structure where there is a defined leader is probably preferred. So first of all, for me, it's a matter of understanding individuals. How can they contribute? What are their strengths? And it probably requires a little bit of digging, even starting at the moment of recruitment of the people. Even when we're employing people, we need to consider what sort of qualities they can bring into the team. If you are looking for somebody in particular, I think you're going to look for a very long time. So it's better to discuss what strengths, and probably start with a bit of personal unpacking the baggage to understand why certain behaviors are or could potentially be displayed. But I think at that beginning level of engagement with the team, it doesn't matter whether you are more collectively working, whether you are more individualistically working. It's important for leaders to understand what's their forte.
Okay. So then does it lead to selfishness or unhealthy competition when you have too much individualistic people in the team? Because like you said, they want personal accolades.
It can do. Yeah, it can do. And that's the thing. Imagine that you have got group of people who working to be the brightest star amongst the team. And everybody wants to feel important, and you have all the group of individuals. So is there a place for a team made of individualistic people? I think that yes, provided you're not going to gather them around targets, which are probably achieved in a more combative way. But if you gather them around purpose, that can mean that the competitiveness can be more friendly, and that can encourage the healthy competition. Provided we can encourage healthy competition based on the purpose, then that can lead to more collaboration and not, combative display of who is more important, because that can lead to the situations that are going to lead potentially to problems with retention and people leaving despite, if led in a slightly different way, they might contribute to the best ability.
And so that will reflect in the way that how the reward system works in that organization or that team.
And also what support we provide. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you are rewarding qualitative behavior instead of quantitative behavior. So let's say you are rewarding the numbers instead of caring qualities, compassion, and showing or demonstrating inclusivity. That's what you're trying to promote with the type of reward that you're focusing on as an organization. Whereas if you focus on you achieved 50, whichever target, and the other person did 55, I'm going to reward the other person and completely ignore the other. It feels that you are doing divide and conquer instead of partnership. Whereas if you reward compassion and team working whilst acknowledging individual strength, you are essentially promoting it via action.
And I think that this is the most complex approach to it.
Complex in a good way?
In a good way, because you are not looking at the team or individuals in a 0-1 perspective. You want to acknowledge people's strengths, you want to acknowledge people's achievements, and you can acknowledge and celebrate success of individuals by all means. But that success leads to fulfilling some sort of purpose that you set up in the first place. And you get there by providing the right support, by providing the right communication channel and understanding of where everyone is. Otherwise, you're going to get out of control, and it's been very difficult to organize and to gather people around the same place. Why then we named this episode as Individualism in the Team, whereas we're talking so greatly about teamwork? Is there a space for individuals in the team? Is there a future for strong individuals if we want to encourage collaboration and working between others? And I'm going to say that there's absolutely a future in appreciating individuals, in making sure that people who are strong individuals can be recognized as valuable partners in the team, and that they are a very, very important talent in the organization. Everybody's talking about teamwork, make the dream work, about there is no I in the team, and all these slogans that we hear in many organizations. But deep down inside, I believe that we have to remember that we are all individuals, and we all, at some level, appreciate acknowledgement of what we're doing, appreciate thinking independently, and whether we are more or less collaborating with others, we ultimately are individuals.
And I think that is also steeped in culture that you are brought up in, because there are certain cultures that will be more collectivism focused, and some cultures, for example, the Western culture, will be more individualistic approach. So it's important to see how you are conditioned when you're growing up, and how does that affect your view and your approach.
Absolutely. I think there's also one more thing that just sprung to my mind. I think people who are more individualistic, they can stumble as well as the project goes on because of few reasons. One, the project might be too complex for one person. Two, they might accept too much responsibility for what they're doing, and that can burn them out much quicker. But working in a team may allow this level of there'll be more heads and the more eyes looking at the problems, and they can spot more flaws in it. Sometimes if you're working on your own, you're so engrossed in your project, in driving it forward and, making all the work, that you can't really see the detail that can trip it up. You haven't got always the right safety netting of the project, and that's why you need others to support you. So recognizing that is also one of the roles of the leader, I guess.
So I guess it's important to identify what drives those individualistic behavior, because if it's fear driven, like you said, then we are leaning towards more perhaps perfectionism, or wanting to do well because I don't want to be judged perspective. And it can be people who are not as fear driven, because we all are to some extent, but people who are more confident, less fear driven, but having that individualistic traits. And it might not be, like you said, their strength to be a team worker.
That's very true. But I'm going to say that as you're joining the team, as you're starting to work in the organization, as you are surrounded by a new group of people, because we can't avoid being around others, let's face it, it's very, very hard. I think the sooner the leaders allow us to realize that we can grow by expanding our traits to the opposite, to gain a little bit of, that collaborative approach from the other team members to our individualistic traits, that's going to benefit us. And also improving this individualism in the team members that prefer a more collaborative approach can expand our horizons and enable us to look at the problem from a slightly wider perspective. And I think that this is where the long-term success of the team and the long-term team health can be achieved by making sure that people grow. And that's our role. That's making sure that people understand where they are, and more importantly, where they come from. What's causing that perfectionism? What's causing that need to hide behind the team to collaborate? Why people lack, for example, confidence? Because some people who prefer working in a team may have not enough confidence to have an individual voice. And by working in a group, they still are able to produce a great result, but not necessarily take the responsibility of that individual hit and accountability for what they're doing. So why do you think and how do you attract a diverse pool of skills? Or is it, let's start with the fact, is it better to have a diverse teams or diverse talent in your organization? Or would you prefer to focus on one kind, have only people who are collaborating in the team, or only work with individuals that are going to deliver the tasks that you're going to ask them to do?
So I'll answer the why first, because if you don't have a diverse pool of skills, what will happen is you'll see that people think alike and they shunt alternative viewpoints. So then the focus very easily turns narrow and it loses perspective. So whether you're getting one group of any one profession, so let's say you're getting a group of GPs or you're getting a group of physiotherapists, what they see is their specialty. Whereas if you get one GP in the room, you get physiotherapists in the room, you get pharmacists, you get nurses, you get OTs, you get a wide variety of people that is crucial to a topic that you are discussing. Everyone can give you different perspective. So when you're looking at patient care, it's not going to be just a one-sided perspective. You're covering more grounds, essentially.
And it's also easier to gather people around the purpose that way.
Yes. So the second question, in terms of how do you attract, I think it's important to have diversity in the interview panel. So if you are in the room as an interviewer, just look and reflect on the panel. Have I got diversity in the panel? And if not, how do I achieve that? Because it might be that you don't have diversity in the interview panel because there isn't sufficient people who have got the skill set. This is something that you need to work on in the organization.
And can develop, absolutely.
Why the progression is not equitable for everybody. And if there isn't, then maybe having an observer who is able to give you a different view to ensure that you are allowing an inclusive recruiting process. And I'm sure people, when I go to events, I do look at the interview panel, or when I've been asked to go to interviews in the past, I do look at the interview panel and see how diverse it is and whether it's something that they acknowledge is not good enough. Because if it's just a one size fit all and it reflects on the organization's value and perhaps also their future planning.
And you're talking about diverse interviewing panels or people who are creating a team. And that means that the more recently we are dealing with the issues, problems, projects that are much more complex. And I think this is where we are led to believe that teamwork is better rather than to have stronger individuals. And some leaders may believe that only by collaborative approach of people who are just going to work together, you're going to achieve the success. Whereas I think that individualism in those teams can add that creativity, can add that sparkle of, a bit of flair and a bit of flamboyance is a big word, but I want to say a bit of vision, a bit of wider perspective that is different from the point of view worked out by the team.
I agree. I think diversity, we're not only talking about racial diversity, we need to think about skill set, gender, sexual orientation, religion, any protected characteristics, experience, and taking all of that into account, because again, the broader perspective of people that you have, the more grounds you're going to get covered.
Yeah, so how do we look after those individuals in the team, those people who like to have things their way. We were talking about encouraging healthy competition by working on a purpose, but I would add to this as well, allowing people to personalize their workspace, their schedules, organize it in the way they prefer to work. So judge them essentially by the results. We need to step away from people who prefer to not be micromanaged, in my opinion.
But maybe not step away and like leave them be, but just give
No,
them a bit
just
more space.
give a bit more space. There's no necessity very often to catch up, 6 times a day with them. I think that avoiding micromanaging,
if anyone's got that time.
yeah, that's another story. But creative individuals contribute more than collectivists in creative tasks. We have to acknowledge that and play to those strengths. So by also allowing personalization of workspace, it makes people more welcome in that space, and that allows people to stay longer with the team, to retain them better.
I think personalization of workplace in general, regardless of their innate qualities or talent, is just something that people would feel that they belong. Like that is my space, regardless of whether they're a team worker or not.
And this is why I say that to some extent, we are all displaying those individualistic traits. There isn't, only teams that we manage. There are people, individual people. We are not just, numbers or people that are supposed to do the tasks. We want to contribute. We have our own opinions, and I think those should be listened to. And this is where we're talking before about one of the most important skill of the leader is to listen.
So I wonder if someone is high performing but poor in teamwork, should they be kept as part of the team?
The first answer to that question would be, it all depends. Okay. And yeah, I'm covered in that respect. But I think that understanding individuals and wanting and willing to let people grow can not necessarily mean that we have to get rid of people that we don't get on well or the team doesn't get on well. You have to remember that it's very hard to find talent that can contribute to the team. It's very hard to find professionals these days. So once you get one, sometimes it's easier to work with them and allow them to grow and allow them to expand their horizons, trying to understand their sort of meaning of life, if you like. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to all of a sudden part ways with everybody who doesn't share your point of view.
So then the follow-up question, what if that person's highly performing, one of the best breaker of any target that has ever been achieved consistently, but also a bully?
I think there is no place for bullying.
Agreed.
End off. The situation where workplace is not a safe space should not happen. And I agree that they can bring the great value to the company or to the organization because they can achieve whatever they dream of. The problem is that usually it's short lived. And by creating the right culture and the right safe space and the place of belonging for people in a team that is safe from bullying, safe,
Harassment.
yeah, all those negative emotions, that can lead to a long-term success of the organization, of the team, and of the company. I am a true believer that bullying should be the thing of the past, and we should acknowledge that if it exists, to acknowledge it and fight it. It's very hard to let it be for a very long time. I mean, there are numerous examples from all sorts of different organizations where this just doesn't work. And
Unfortunately, it's still happening.
unfortunately, it's still happening, and it is going to happen because people have got some unresolved issues that lead to wanting to be more powerful than others.
But also, I think we probably have seen it numerous times throughout our career that people who are highly performing were given like a jail-free pass because they're able to achieve what the company or the team or the organization wants to achieve. And so any action that is deemed unacceptable are then pushed under the carpet.
And that's why the purpose of the team or of the organization should be based on universal values that are shared by everybody, not those values that are negative, not those behaviors that are just simply not acceptable.
So, how would you manage someone who is new and junior and wanted to start making changes before understanding the system?
I think that it would be a very good idea to try to understand them first. I think that it can be a very positive thing as well. It may highlight and revive the team. I am quite cautious when you have people that are starting in the organization and they shadow others or start, to observe what everybody else is doing, and then they become like everybody else. So the standard is not necessarily lifted by the addition to the team. It's just sort of ending up on the level that the team's already there. We want to improve and we want to progress and we want to be better. And I believe that given opportunity, it can be a wise thing for the leaders to do. Now, this can break up the balance of the team, but then, as we said, there is always going to be some sort of imbalances just depending on which directions we are heading. If somebody's coming in and trying to avoid the risks that they observe there or wants to see an easy way to boost their productivity or collaboration or, start, oh, do you know what? Instead of sending mail pigeons, why don't we start using email? That's a brainwave that should be supported, I believe.
So, any suggestions should be listened to and not belittled, even though they're new and junior. Because sometimes the initial reaction for somebody who's more senior is just like, don't even get started, understand the system before you try to implement changes.
And then you just grow into the system and you're part of the system.
I can see pros and cons in both, to be fair, because without understanding the system and then wanting to change it, you might not understand the cogs that make the system work and implement some changes that will be more sustainable instead of just high in the sky idea. But also, there is merit into taking their suggestions into account and say, this doesn't work because of X, Y, and Z. Go and find out about the system. I understand where you're coming from. When you understand the system, come back to me and tell me what are the ways that can be improved. So encouraging that behavior, but help support any gaps.
Very true. Now, there is a good example of how things are organized in those teams that have to be as tightly working together as they only can, but they consist of people who are usually quite individualistic. So the tightest groups I can think of that have to work together, apart from people working, I don't know, as surgeons in the theater, would be musical groups. Everybody's playing a different instrument and they are all individuals. Everybody has to be really good at what they're doing in order to achieve a success. But they have to still play together. You can't have, complete chaos because it's going to lead to nowhere. And imagine somebody new coming in and says, right, I think we should do things completely differently. And gathering their ideas amongst other individuals as well and trying to take all of this into consideration can be seen as a bit of a power struggle to start with, but then it can work. It can be improved. There are some examples of musical groups that had an addition of a new person that changed, transformed the, I don't know, sound, added instrument, added the flair. Usually we see the people in the front, those in vocals that are doing it.
Yes, however, that needs to come with engagement. If that person come in and just dictate change, that wouldn't work.
they're not going to last long.
So
Absolutely.
the engagement is really important.
And communication.
And that's what I meant in regards to how the suggestions are made, instead of, why don't you do this? So if they come in and say the changes should be done and this is going to happen going forward, I don't think it's going to be received very well, because there is no understanding, there is no curiosity, and there is no engagement.
But for the right engagement, you need the right communication. So you need the right reasoning.
Yes, that's what I said.
And this is what can make it work, yeah?
That's what I meant in terms of demonstrating curiosity. Because if you do that and you start asking questions, it's coming from a place of help me understand, instead of judging, this is not good enough.
What if an individual doesn't have the confidence, and we can see it as leaders? Would you encourage that to grow that confidence in one way or the other?
I see it all the time. Usually comes from people who are less experienced, and they always say, oh, once I get more experience, I'm more confident. And a lot of the time that is not the case. And so I tend to work with them to find out what is actually causing that.
Where's the barrier?
Where is the barrier? And again, what fear is in the driver's seat, and then help them be aware of it. And then they need to do the work with guidance to help to overcome that with time.
Very true. So now, do we want individuals in the team?
Yes, and we need both.
And I think we all are individuals deep inside, because we all want to be respected and valued by people who work with us. And yeah, well, tell us your thoughts. Let us know what teams you've been working with, what individuals you couldn't stand, or those that inspired you, because there's usually a bit of both in all of us. So now we're going straight to Yuen Reads, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye. It's about time for Yuen Reads.
In today's Yuen Reads, it is Emmanuel Acho's Uncomfortable Conversation with a Black Man. Conversation about race is usually difficult, but much needed. Hard to digest, but vital. Emmanuel seems to have a gift of breaking down defensive barriers to those who either listened or read his book. He starts with compassion and understanding, and I feel he created a space for everyone to be vulnerable, so learning can happen without blame or guilt or shame. I strongly recommend his book alongside his video series too, that explores white privilege, cultural appropriation, reverse racism, and much more.
Thank you for listening to the Imperfect Clinician podcast.
Grow and learn with us using our experience and flaws, just like we'd learn every day about ourselves. The best way to support us is to hit that follow or subscribe button. Thanks for your participation in our socials. We take to heart the ratings, reviews, and comments.
The best way we can repay you is by making this podcast better and by reaching and inspiring more people like you, like us. Until next time.